The Arctic Monkeys are easily the biggest band to come out of the UK during the last 20 years, and are considered by some as the last great rock and roll band. But what most people don't know is that they were one of the first ever rock bands to get big through the internet, and big they got. Without further ado, make sure to subscribe if you like old bands and enjoy. This is the story of the Arctic Monkeys, the internet's first rock stars. The Arctic Monkeys formed in Sheffield in 2002, with Alex Turner as the beautiful face of the band, and also Matt Helders, Jamie Cook and Andy Nicholson. Inspired by the well-known kings of indie rock at the time, The Strokes, and by the lesser-known indie kings, The Libertines, the Arctic Monkeys just seemed like any other local band to come out of UK. Little did everyone know that they were about to change everything. See, this is the early 2000s, and there's two main things going on right now. One, rock is apparently dying. And two, the internet has just been born. Well, not born, music fans just started using it, you know what I mean. Now, you might hear that sentence, rock is dying, and by now you're probably just so sick of it. But this whole idea had its roots in the early 2000s, after both grunge and Britpop started to die off. Oh no guys, hip-hop is getting played on the radio, how dare they? Was gonna say rock and roll now. Well, don't worry, because a hip new band is coming along, and they're called The Strokes. Yeah, it was The Strokes. I can't make a video on the history of the Arctic Monkeys and not mention The Strokes. The Strokes were being praised by the NME as the next Nirvana or the next Oasis. They were gonna be the saviors of rock and roll. They were hyped up so much actually that they were selling out shows in the US and UK before even releasing their first album. Now, did these guys manage to bring rock back from the dead? I guess. I mean, I don't think rock needs to be mainstream to be alive. There are a lot of good bands out there who aren't mainstream, and people definitely still love rock and roll. The problem was that the Strokes didn't really live up to the hype that NME created for them, well, at least in sales. The internet had just come out, and piracy was a big problem for bands like these at the time, because you could find the whole Is This It album pretty easily and for free. Now this is where the boys from Sheffield come on. The Arctic Monkeys started rehearsing at Yellow Arc Studios and had their first gig on 13th of June 2003. After a couple of gigs, the band started recording some demos, which would later be known as the Beneath the Boardwalk demos. Now these demos were the key to the start of the band's career, because Alex would give them to people for free. Yes, after years of record labels and big bands stressing out about piracy and people not paying them for their music, the Arctic Monkeys just gave their demos to people for free, because they felt like it. They didn't like how other bands were selling them for £2 or £3, so they just said fuck it, and accidentally kickstarted their career. What also helped the band was the fact that the songs on these demos were pretty fucking good, with iconic songs like Mardy Bum, Fake Tales of San Francisco, and the one and only I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor. I know that nowadays it's normal to just search any song on the internet and you could listen to it, but back at the time, the music industry was terrified of the internet and still didn't know how it properly worked. Gig after gig, the North was starting to hear more about the Monkeys, and some fans even opened a page for them in MySpace, where they uploaded all their songs. Word started to spread, and people knew that they were gonna be the next big thing, but the band just didn't seem to care. Like, I don't mean they were assholes and didn't care about their fans, they just didn't care about the fame. They only wanted to play their music and knew that people were gonna enjoy it. 2 years later, the band independently released their first EP, 5 Minutes with Arctic Monkeys, which I think is a pretty long EP, you know? There's nothing wrong with only lasting 5 minutes. Anyways, yeah, the EP included Fake Tales of San Francisco and one of my favorite songs from the band, From the Ritz to the Rubble. This EP made it possible for the band to get signed by Domino Records, which Alex quite liked because they gave the band the freedom that they wanted. The band was just sailing smoothly towards the mainstream, and it was all thanks to the internet. This was just the start. After getting signed, they released their first ever single, I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor, which, believe it or not, hit #1. The single also included my favorite song from the band, Bigger Boys and Stolen Sweethearts. Bigger boys and stolen sweethearts, so you're better off without it anyway. The free demos and the MySpace fan page were starting to pay off handsomely, because they managed to hit #1 in the UK with barely any money spent on marketing. Also, it didn't hurt that the band's early songs are super easy to get into. With this amazing success, the band started working on their debut album, and on the 29th of January 2006, they released Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not. Now this is where the Monkees put their name on the history books, because this album changed everything. See, this is where they really needed to prove themselves, because the whole of the UK had their eyes on them. The demos, the singles, the live performances, the fucking MySpace files, 3 years of them playing their hearts out, they were all leading up to this moment. Were the Arctic Monkeys worth the hype, or were they just some guys who got lucky that year? Well, you already know the answer to this, but Whatever People Say I Am became the fastest selling debut album in UK history. I'm gonna be very biased when I talk about this album because it's still my favorite album from the band, but yeah, it definitely did deserve the hype. I think if we're gonna compare them to the Strokes, lyric-wise, Alex is a much better writer than Julian Casablanca. Or, you know, I relate more to a normal guy from Sheffield than the son of a millionaire. Alex has this ability to just create a world with his lyrics, a world that you and I know very well. He puts you on the place of your everyday man who's just trying to have a fun night, and he just builds you a whole story. These are stories that everyone has gone through, and that's exactly why they work so well. He was the voice of the youth, and that was the life of your average teen in the early 2000s. Get drunk, get kicked out of bars, meet some annoying people, meet some good people, fall in love, get your heart broken. That's life, and that's beautiful, and this album is beautiful, and it also fucking rocks. The band had found their own sound, and the album is so fast and full of emotion, just like they were when they were young. There was no time to waste, you just had to live. Anyways, this album doing this good meant more than just some money for the band. They had just completely changed the music industry for the next 20 years. Julian Casablanca spent a lot of money to promote the Strokes for a couple good months before they even dropped anything. And then these guys come on and just change UK history by just giving out some free demos. I have to say that the Strokes were still way bigger at this point. That's because, believe it or not, the album didn't do as hot in the US. This is a very common theme on this channel, unfortunately, but don't worry, because there's another album coming soon. Was gonna make sure people knew them on the other side of the ocean. The point is that the music industry stopped being afraid of the internet, and this whole thing, along with what Radiohead did within Rainbows, was just gonna snowball into a little something called Spotify, or YouTube if you're like 50 years old I guess. After casually breaking the record for the fastest selling debut album in the UK, the band had another problem. Just like the Strokes, the world was waiting to see if their second album was gonna match the greatness of the first one. And just like the Strokes, it fucking did. Favorite Worst Nightmare is still one of the most iconic records of the band, and it ended up developing that sound they had on their debut. The album includes iconic songs of the band like Fluorescent Adolescent, which is used in the In-Betweeners intro, and that one song from TikTok. I honestly think 505, despite being really overplayed, still holds up as one of the band's greatest songs, just because the guitar is that good. Also, there's a coffee place here in Tirana called the 505 Cafe. I went there once and was filled with lesbians, so shout out to them. Jokes aside, Favorite Worst Nightmare managed to further show the world how truly great this band was. They instantly hit number 1 in the UK and got number 7 in the US actually, so that's an improvement. Every single song of the album was on the top 200 charts in the UK, so it was clear people loved this band and wanted to see more of it. They won a bunch of awards and dressed up in some silly costumes, and life was good for them. This was not even close to the peak they were about to reach. I keep teasing AM like it's Thanos or something, you guys know what's coming. Anyways, there's 1 or 2 albums we need to go through before we reach the big one. It's time for Alex to grow out his hair and put his silly headphones on. August 20th of 2009, the band released their 3rd studio album, Humbug. The way the band approached Humbug was a pretty bold, but at the same time pretty necessary decision for them. Humbug doesn't take the same path as the band's first 2 albums, but instead it tries to be more mature, and it works. The album is slower and has a sludgy sound that was most probably inspired by that one album that was going around in the early 2000s. You know the one. Humbug includes some great songs of the band like Secret Door, Crying Lightning, and of course, Cornerstone. Alex's lyrics and singing certainly show some great improvement from the first 2 albums, and they showed the world that the Monkees were here to stay. Also, the album was recorded in the US with the help of Josh Homme from the Queens of the Stone Ages and James Ford. Humbug reached number 1 in the UK. This was only the beginning of their relationship with American music. After a quick break, it was time for their 4th studio album, Suck It and See. Oh, well, if you insist. Okay, so apparently the phrase means give the try to British people, but Americans thought it was about sucking, so they censored it in some places. Suck It and See was written by Alex in his house in Brooklyn and was produced in LA, but what makes it different from Humbug is that it gives up on the dark sound of their third album, and instead it goes for a more vintage and poppy sound. Nonetheless, just like with Oasis, it didn't matter what they put out because they would always reach number 1 in the charts. The only difference is that the Arctic Monkeys put out actually good albums in the 2000s. Unfortunately for the band, this was probably their least popular work to date, and to this day, the first 3 albums are way more appreciated by the fans. But before I get into their most popular work, we of course have to talk about Submarine. Despite being released later than Suck It and See, the soundtrack was actually recorded before the band even started working on their 4th album. Alex wrote all the songs on an acoustic guitar in his house in New York. In this EP, he gives up the rocky sound of the band and starts getting more influenced by baroque pop, similar to what he did with the other band he formed in 2007, The Last Shadow Puppets. The EP was used as a soundtrack for Richard Ayoade's debut feature film, Submarine, and it's a fan favorite among the fans of the band because it dives deeper into Alex's darker feelings and emotions. Me personally, I think it's better than Suck It and See, despite just being an EP, but I don't know, maybe I'm just a sad loser. Okay, now it's time to talk about AM. AM didn't just manage to put the Arctic Monkeys on the map, they fucking got the map and ripped it apart. AM is the reason why the Arctic Monkeys have more listeners on Spotify than the Beatles, Oasis, Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, and basically most great British bands out there. See, there's a reason why I'm mentioning Britain here, because when they started, the Monkeys had the same curse as a lot of British bands out there. They could not break America. Even if they got their album in the top 10 or top 15, they were never as culturally significant as they were back home. Now this is where AM comes on and changes everything. This was the point where the band said goodbye to being indie, and Alex went full rock and roll star. He got some cool new hair, a new jacket, and created an actual persona for himself, heavily inspired by 50s rock and roll. Even the album's name was named after VU from the Velvet Underground, so Alex wanted to make it obvious that he was going the old school way, but this time they were gonna do something that was never seen before. He wanted to combine rock and roll with hip hop lyricism and melody. So much so that he got inspired by Drake of all people. I don't know if you guys have been alive for the last 20 years, but hip hop has been pretty big recently. Alex noticed this rise in popularity of hip hop and saw it as a chance to revive rock and roll.
That rock and roll, eh? That rock and roll, it just won't go away.
Yeah, he went on a full-on speech about how rock is here to stay, which is really funny because it's 10 years later and rock has never been more dead. Anyways, some people to this day aren't that happy with this change, and they feel like they got robbed from the authentic Alex they had been a fan of since the early days of the band. Even Liam Gallagher had something to say about this.
The geezer out the Arctic Monkeys, he did it, didn't he? You know what I mean? He started getting his hair in a quiff and that, and big biker leather jackets on, you know what I mean? It's like when he goes back to his mum's, does he really walk in the door with that biker leather jacket on and go, "Hey mum, can I have some tea?" You know what I mean? She's going to give him a clip, isn't she? You know what I mean?
Despite some unhappy British people, AM was actually dearly loved on the other side of the ocean, and it became the band's biggest album there. Do I Wanna Know is still one of the most iconic guitar riffs in the history of rock and roll. Also, songs like I Wanna Be Yours, Are You Mine, and Why'd You Only Call Me When You're High have billions of streams on Spotify, and this album instantly became the band's most iconic work. AM wasn't just a big album, it was a cultural phenomenon, and I think the reason why it worked so well goes back to their original ways, the internet. See, AM is a really easy album to get into, which is a big reason for its popularity, but despite that, there was another reason why this album blew up so much. That reason was Tumblr. Of course, all the stars aligned for the band so they could get an album this big, and songs like Are You Mine and Do I Wanna Know couldn't possibly go unnoticed, but around 2013 and 2014 was also the peak of Tumblr, and Tumblr fucking loved AM. This album turned into an aesthetic for them, and teenagers everywhere were getting obsessed with it. This caused the band to not just become the internet's first rock stars, but the biggest ones as well. No band has ever had a chokehold on the internet like Arctic Monkeys did with AM, and they certainly got lucky with the timing. This fame they reached through Tumblr later translated into TikTok fame as well, but I don't think they got obsessed with AM in the way Tumblr did. They do love 505 though. Despite not being my favorite Monkeys album, I still think AM is a good way for people to get introduced to the band. I just wish Americans weren't afraid of an accent and they listened more to the first two albums, but it's not like the band is lacking listeners anyways. After AM, the whole world was expecting a similar follow-up. After all, they had to capitalize on the attention they had. But Alex didn't think this way. Instead, the band went into a 5-year break, and their comeback was probably their most controversial part of their career. It was time for them to release their 6th studio album, Tranquility, Base Hotel and Casino. This album was a really bold choice from the band, and to this day fans of the Monkees are still divided. Some call it boring and say that they just wanted AM too, but I think Alex Turner knows this more than everyone else. I really respect his decision of doing what he wants to do with his career, even if it's not gonna please everyone. At the end of the day, art is only a depiction of one's true self. Tranquility Base Hotel was written on a piano Alex got on his 30th birthday, and it's inspired by psychedelic pop, space pop, glam rock, and jazz. Alex goes back to his roots once again and builds a whole world and a whole atmosphere around you. Only this time, it's not 2000s Sheffield, it's space. Even the title of the album was inspired by the 1969 Apollo 11 moon landing. To some people, this was the worst album the band had ever made. There are quite a few fans out there who actually love this album and think it's their best album they ever made. I certainly can appreciate it, but I guess I'll let you guys decide. Okay, now it's time to talk about the band's actual most controversial album, The Car. I guess you can say that The Car is Alex Turner's final form, well, at least for now. The album continues on the path that Tranquility Base Hotel started, and we hear a very different and slower Alex. I think at this point the band knows that they've more than proved themselves to the world, they're just doing what they actually like. Even Alex knows that this album isn't meant to be commercially successful or change the world like AM did, and he's fine with it. He just wants to show the world what's going on in his own head, and if they don't like it, who cares? It's not like he ever cared about what other people thought. I think The Car is still pretty loved by the hardcore fans of the band, and it's interesting to see where the band will go next. I know this is pretty ironic because I just said that Alex doesn't care about what other people think, but me personally, I think the Strokes did a much better job with their latest album when it comes to taking different approaches. Also, Alex does this weird thing on his live performances where he doesn't let people sing along with him and he'll start butchering the songs. I don't know, it's kinda yucky. Despite that, my final thoughts for this video are that they've been a pretty consistent band throughout their career, and they certainly changed both music and the internet, and they did it while having fun. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought of the band, and if there's any other topic you want me to talk about. I hope you like this video and subscribe. Also, check out the Patreon, I need money, okay? Love you.